After a year of protests sweeping Muslim countries, some say Senegal, a Muslim African country, could be next.
Opposition leaders and activists in Uganda have been inspired by the Arab Spring. Protests and strikes have been happening on and off for 6 months.
A few months ago, while I was at home in Nigeria, tensions were at a high as citizens began expressing their discontent with our current government. For the first time in my life, I saw Nigerians put aside ethnic and religious differences to unite as one.
Nigerians take to the street angry at a recent government decision to remove fuel subsidies. Many here see the subsidy as the only benefit of living in an oil-producing country.
We voted them. At least they told us to vote them. We believed in them and we took them there. And this is what we're getting. It's sad.
Nigeria, come out to fight for your freedom. Forget.
I came here scared. I cannot tell you I came confidently. I came scared of my life, but I came because I want to see a new Nigeria. It's sad. Our government have failed us. Our parents have failed us because they've not spoken. It's time for us to speak.
But see, one thing must be noted, that must be mentioned to the world. This is strictly non-violent.
We just want the government to stand up and be responsible. If they cannot be responsible, they should resign. It's only in Nigeria that people do not resign. Why? Because they are selfish.
What I sense is that people wanted a measure of dignity. Possibly it's even a lot more than whether it's subsidy or no subsidy. People have endured far worse than whether the price of petrol is raised.
My parents stopped me today, but I damn the consequences. If I die, I die.
I hope that we are able to take advantage of this moment and make something of it that leads to the greater good. But will I be completely shocked if it peters out? No, I would not.
The new price will be a more modest increase, around 50% higher than the old price. That falls short of demands by labor unions for a full reinstatement of the subsidy.
Government should shrink its sizes. There shouldn't be any excesses in there. And then we can all tighten up and face the future, knowing that it's a shared responsibility and a shared suffering. But just asking one side of the party, in fact the innocent party, to bear the burden of years of mismanagement and corruption is really, really unfair. After witnessing the events in Nigeria, I decided to explore how my experience related with that of my fellow Mount Holyoke students who were affected by the Arab revolutions. I sat down with these students and Professor Holly Hansen, an expert on Uganda, another African country currently pushing back against its government. My goal? To understand what the Occupy Nigeria movement could imply about the future of my country.
Democracy. Okay. Democracy does not have to be the same everywhere.
No, Syria is not a democracy in any way whatsoever. It's a dictatorship.
Well, since I was born, I've only known one president.
It might not be called like democracy in Western terms, like American terms.
Democracy is people feeling like they have a choice.
I get the chance now to reflect on it and see what was wrong, what was really wrong, that I didn't have the chance to understand at the time when I was living under it.
There's usually a question that you go answer. Would you like this person to be your president? Yes? No? And I know that nobody says no, because there's just no point, Usually the election results are 98% for the president. That's it.
People can take anything, but not when it comes to their dignity. When you prevent a person from expressing themselves, you're just touching their dignity. you're disrespecting them.
When I was 18, I went to actually vote, and it was my first vote. So I wanted to say no. There's a big guy standing in front of me, and he took me aside and he was like, "What did you write?" Before I actually put my paper in. And I was like, I put yes, and he was like, "No, you put no."
That people are finishing school, finishing secondary school, and there are not jobs for them. And there's this huge bulge of the population who are youth unable to transition into adulthood.
The economy was stuck in a state where nobody can just move forward. It's just if anybody tries to move forward, the government or some official or some police officer, they're going to stand in their way. They're going to try to prevent them in any way possible if they didn't have enough money to bribe them.
I think the simplest frustrations is feeling like you do not demand the respect of the governmental institutions that are supposed to be there to protect you and help you. That in everyday life you fear that interaction, that you do anything you can to completely avoid using any of the governmental institutions.
The problem is that people could not talk because if you speak out, the government and the police are gonna arrest you and you're gonna disappear or something's gonna happen.
In Uganda, the rhetoric of the state has changed. Now it's people's own fault if they don't have what they need. So that's going to make people angry.
People were very aware of what was going on in their countries. They just needed to see what this can lead to. And they saw that in the Tunisian example, so that's why you had different countries taking the step and trying to do the same thing.
People looked at Syria and they asked Syrians, maybe you're next. And Syrians were like, what? Hell no.
In the 20, 30 years under this regime, we cannot picture something else. Like, what can happen after this?
We are really happy with our life, and that happiness comes from stability.
You read about freedom in the books, but how do you make it your reality?
When you've asked yourself, could that happen in Syria? That is the moment where you had the thought. And once people have the thought, it will not go away. Somebody is going to act on it.
When you see the video and you see people getting shot and you see people bleeding and people are like screaming their lungs out in the streets and like really reacting, you can't just sit there and be passive. At least you would share the video. Let others know and let those people know. And then you had a big community that was sharing pretty much the same information.
And they took military action in March and they killed about 50 people in Texas in one day. And once they did that, that was a turning point.
It was called a walk to work movement, and the explanation was we are walking to work to show our solidarity with poor people who can't afford to take transportation to work and also who basically can't afford to eat anymore.
I knew that there was something wrong, and it was enough for me at the time to join my friends or my teachers or people who lived in my neighborhood to walk in the street and be like, we want some justice here. But once I was in that group, I started to feel that vibe, like, this is really important. I should be participating in this. This is going to be historical.
And here's how we know that the government was looking at North Africa. As soon as the protests began in Tahrir Square, the federal government put a 24-hour guard around Constitution Square in Kampala. So it was impossible for anyone to go into Constitution Square. Why? Nothing was planned for Constitution Square, but seeing those people in Tahrir Square, the government shut down Constitution Square in Kampala.
The violence didn't really get the government anywhere. It activated the demonstrators even more. They had actually now a bigger reason to go outside and demonstrate and ask, for the regime to for the president to step down.
The government was willing to shoot live ammunition at demonstrators. And many thousands of people were imprisoned. So it was just straight out repression.
I'm always grateful that there was not a violent reaction of the people, because usually you expect violence from the violence, and the Benali regime was exerting violence physically and also intellectually.
And it's very, very hard for protests to continue in the context of a conviction that the military will support the government and shoot the people. And that's what people believed in Uganda, and that eventually kept people off the street.
Because what we heard at the time, that he took off on the plane, and we just heard that, and people they were like, it's over. It was a very overwhelming moment. Again, like at the time, I didn't really understand what was going on, but I don't know, like that moment when I seen my mother cried, my brother cried, I cried, and I didn't really understand why I cried. But then it was so huge that I couldn't grasp it at the time. I couldn't. But I remember I had tears in my eyes.
So I'm not really happy with our revolution because it's not going well. It's going badly.
A lot of people were not happy with the agreement anyways, because he would just step down and the vice president was gonna be there instead of him.
So whether I'm happy with the revolution or not, I'm happy it happened. It's really hard for me to say I'm happy it happened. My city lost 5,000 people. Nobody's happy that happened. It's destroyed.
The next day after the revolution, you had people in the street, they were cleaning up after the mess that they made. That may be really simple, but to me, it was overwhelming. And the moments that I lived and the solidarity that I've seen, it just blew my mind away. I would never think that I would see that in my country. Because we were just, I never imagined that.
It's actually harder to create a responsible, functioning democratic society than it is to overthrow a dictator.
I see a lot of good change, and I'm not sure if I am the person to say this revolution succeeded or not, but I see the change.
Of course, it's very important that it actually went out and demonstrated, because that was the trigger. But the sad thing is that they didn't have a decision in making the new government.
The fact that everyone is happy and is excited about a new government. The fact that people were overwhelmed when they were voting. It was a big moment.
I might have a very pessimistic view of this, but it's really hard for a government and a regime that has been there for so long, and ruling this way, to change so fast.
Syria is not one of those places that will optimally change. It's going to pay the price for a long time. And people are going to pay the price for a long time. The saddest part, though, is that revolution is the intellectual, political revolution is carried out by a bunch of stupid assholes. That is the sad part. Why they're stupid assholes? Not because they're not smart enough, and not because they don't care enough. They do. But none of them understand that the importance of unity is beyond all their shit. And none of them understand that while they're completely failing at uniting as a political oppositional social front, the people on the street who are paying the price of the revolution are dying.
So I think what we saw in Senegal, or what we saw in Nigeria, or what we saw in Uganda are just chapters of a longer story. The story's not finished.
This process has shown me that there is only one story I need to understand to appreciate what happened in Nigeria. And that is the story of possibility, of change, of unity. It is the story of people finding the power of their own voices. And this story gives me hope for a new and better Nigeria.
Nigeria, come out, to fight for your freedom.